I stood by my bedroom window watching. The streetlights reflect off the rainwater pooling in the driveway. This house in a quiet corner of Austin, Texas, had once been a place filled with laughter and whispered words of love. Now there were only walls of silence and invisible spaces between me and Michael, the man I had called my husband for the past 17 years. Michael was 49, I was 42, and our marriage had been a beautiful love story that everyone admired. I still remember the early days when he was full of life. His bright blue eyes that burned through any distance between us. His every touch was electric, his every kiss, a thirst that could never be fully satisfied in those early years together. I never had to doubt his desire for me. We used to cling to each other like tomorrow would never come. We used to pass each other in the kitchen with meaningful caresses. We used to make love on the living room floor before dawn. But now that has become a distant memory. Michael is still a good man. He never hurt. Me never failed to take responsibility, but love is not built on obligational one, and what scares me most is not that he had changed, but that I have changed. Two, we no longer touch each other like before when I walk into the bedroom in my soft silk nightgown. He no longer looks at me as if I were the most beautiful woman in the world. When I accidentally let my hand brush his shoulder in the morning, he just smiles and continues reading the news on his phone. I can't remember the last time he pulled me into his arms so forcefully. It must have been years. This bed, the bed where we once shared joy, sorrow, and hot nights, is now just a space between two sleeping bodies. I can feel his warmth beside me, but it no longer makes me shiver. The hands that once held me tightly now rest on my waist as if by habit. I close my eyes trying to remember the feeling when he still desired me. Like before, but all are just blurry images, like an old film in slow motion. There is a void in my heart, a void that I cannot fill. No matter how hard I try, and I began to wonder, was I asking for too much? Was this just the normal course of a long marriage? Or maybe I really needed more. That night, I lay quietly in the dark, listening to Michael's steady breathing beside me. My eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling, but inside my head was a storm that would not be quelled. I couldn't goon like this. I tried so many things to rekindle the fire between us. More suggestive nightgowns, gentle innuendos at dinner, fleeting touches of meaning. As I passed him, but none of them were enough. He responded, but not with the raw desire he had before, but with a gentle acceptance, as if he were just doing his duty. I didn't want duty. I wanted the burning thirst, the obsession, the hunger I'd seen in his eyes. But I knew it was gone. I couldn't fool myself any longer. There was a hunger inside me, not just for the body, but for life, for the feeling of being wanted so badly that it was irresistible. I tried to deny it, but it grew stronger with each day, each night. I lay next to a man I loved, but who no longer made me feel alive. I closed my eyes, letting a thought creep into my head. I needed something else. The thought startled me. I wasn't the type of woman to cheat. I wasn't the type to cheat on my marriage, but was that a betrayal if I was just reclaiming a part of myself that I'd lost? I tried to convince myself that this was just a phase, but then every time I saw other men, younger, more energetic, running outside in the park near my house, I felt a jolt of electricity run down my spine, not because I wanted them, but because I wanted the feeling they could give me. I wanted to know what it would be like to have a man look at me that way again. With an uncontrollable hunger, I began to notice how Michael reacted whenever I talked about those men. The next morning, as we sat at the breakfast table, I stirred my coffee and said in passing, I saw a young man jogging. This morning, his body was amazing. I mean, the energy he had was amazing. I didn't look at Michael as I spoke, but I sensed a change in the air. He took a sip of coffee, put down his cup, and replied in a low, slightly stiff voice, I'm not sure I can keep up with that anymore. I didn't miss the subtle irritation in his voice. Good, I smiled slightly, putting down my spoon. Well, that's understandable. People our age lose that energy. Some keep it, some don't. I saw his eyes darken slightly over his coffee. I was planting a seed, a thought he hadn't thought of before, but now it was there in the back of his mind, gnawing over the Next few days, I continued to let the idea fester between us, little comments, subtle gaps, vague hints. I didn't say what I really, really wanted, but I let him feel it, the absence, the emptiness, the hunger inside. But I let him feel it, the absence. The emptiness, the hunger inside him on the third night, as Michael lay beside me, holding his phone and scrolling through the news. I turned away from him, letting my hand slide gently down my body. I didn't mean to make any noise, but I wasn't completely silent either. I let my breathing quicken, letting my movements become more distinct in the darkness. I heard a stare, then he stopped. He was listening. His voice came out soft but heavy with hesitation. "Are you sure about?" This is stopped, turned my head toward him. The dim light from the window illuminated. His face, in his eyes, I saw sadness, acceptance, and something else. An admission that he had known this all along. "I know I'm not enough for you anymore." I didn't deny it. I didn't rush to comfort him with lies. I just looked at him long enough to let him know that this wasn't his fault, but it wasn't something I could ignore any longer. Michael took a deep breath, then let it out as if he'd been holding it in for a long time. "So what are we going to do?" This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I kept my voice calm. Not too eager, not too cushy, I don't know, but maybe it's time we found a solution. Michael looked at me, his eyes a tug of war between possessiveness and resignation. Finally, he nodded. Slightly. If that's the way to go, a wave of relief washed over me. My plan was set in motion the next morning. Michael woke up earlier than usual. I heard the sound of running water in the bathroom, the sound of a razor blade sliding across his chin, the familiar click of a perfume bottle being opened. How long had it been since he bothered to shave in the morning? I lay in bed watching silently, saying nothing. I knew his mind was racing with new thoughts when he emerged from the bathroom, his shirt buttoned neatly, his hair still slightly damp. I looked at him, smiling slightly. "Are you going out so early?" Michael paused, as if he wasn't sure what he was doing either. I have a meeting." He avoided my gaze, but I didn't need him to say it outright. I knew he was trying to adjust himself, trying to soften the loss he felt but didn't want to face. I didn't say anything more. I left the silence a space large enough for him to fill with his own thoughts in the days that followed. A subtle but obvious change occurred between us. Michael no longer ignored my suggestions. He noticed the way I talked about other men, the way I subtly compared his fatigue to the energy younger men had. And instead of objecting or denying, he listened one evening as we sat together on the sofa, the dim living room lights reflecting off the glass of the windows. I swirled my glass of wine in my hands and said, slowly, "Have you ever thought about trying something different?" Michael didn't answer right away. He put down the remote, turned to face me. His eyes were heavy with thought. "What do you mean?" I took a sip of wine, waiting for amendment, letting the silence between us stretch long enough for him to feel the seriousness of what I was about to say. "I'm not saying we change everything, but what if we made a deal?" Michael blinked. "A deal?" "I nodded. "A deal that we're still husband and wife, still life partners. But you can find what you need." Elsewhere, I saw the struggle in his eyes. Part of him wanted to object immediately, but another part was drawn into the gray area of this idea, a place he never thought he'd enter. "You're saying you want someone else? No beating around the bush? No denial." I looked him straight in the eye. "I want to feel alive." Again, he took a deep breath, his eyes leaving me, staring into space. I gave him time. I knew he was weighing all this could mean the loss, the pride, but also the escape. Finally, he let out a long breath and asked, "So, where do you stand in all this?" I put my glass down on the table, leaned toward him, my voice soft but firm. "You will still be my husband, still the one I trusted, the one I returned to after everything. We didn't break up. We didn't betray each other, but you no longer have to try to be someone you can't be. A minute passed, then two." I looked at him, he looked at me, and then a slight nod. No formal agreement, no contract, no clear terms. Just an understanding. Michael didn't object. And that was acceptance. After that night, a new door opened. We didn't talk about it much, didn't set hard rules. But one thing we both understood. A boundary had been erased. Michael started to leave the house on certain evenings, not because of work, but because he knew I needed my own space too. I didn't tell him what I did. During those hours, and he didn't ask, only one thing was certain: we had entered a new world, a new way of being, married one that neither of us had anticipated after that evening. An awkward silence fell between Michael and me, but it wasn't the silence of distance that had come before. It was more like the silence between two people who had just made a major decision, a tacit agreement that we both understood, but neither of us had spoken about. Michael didn't ask me what I did on the nights he was away, and I didn't ask him how he felt. But I knew he noticed the change. I could see it in the way he looked at me, sometimes silently, watching me a little longer. When I came down the stairs in my new dress, I saw it in the way he reacted when I left, subtle hints about the nights I had other plans. The first night I met the other man, I didn't tell Michael where I was going. I didn't have to. He knew. I walked down the stairs in my body-hugging dress, the scent of my new perfume wafting through there. When I picked up my car keys from the table, Michael was sitting on the sofa, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He didn't turn around, but I could see his hand tighten around the glass. "A little. I'm staying at a hotel tonight," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. I paused, looking at him. Part of me wanted to ask, "Are you sure?" But I knew the answer was obvious. "Okay." I walked out the door without looking back. I met Daniel at a swanky bar in downtown Austin. He was younger than me, maybe 30, with sharp eyes and a confident smile. He didn't have to try too hard to impress. He had the kind of energy I'd been craving for a long time. We didn't talk about nonsense. I hadn't come here looking for someone to listen to my problems, and he didn't need someone to talk to, just a look, a touch. I felt it immediately, the feeling I'd lost long ago. We left the bar earlier than we'd planned when the hotel day closed behind me. I knew there was no turning back. His chin slid down my arm, his hot breath brushing against my neck. I closed my eyes. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive. The next morning, I walked into the house. Still foggy. I didn't expect Michael to wake up early, but he was sitting in the kitchen, cup of coffee in front of him. His eyes lingered on me for a long moment. I couldn't read his mind, and I probably didn't want to. I didn't apologize. I didn't explain. I just poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down at the table across from him. Silence. Then Michael broke it with a simple sentence. "Are you okay?" A simple question, but full of meaning. I picked up my cup, took a sip, and looked at him better than ever. He didn't say anything else, but I knew he understood. After that night, nothing was the same. I didn't tell Michael when I was leaving, but he knew, and he didn't object. He didn't leave every time I had plans. Sometimes he would still be home sitting quietly in his study, pretending not to know. But I knew he sensed the change. I could see it in his eyes when I returned. There was no arguing, no blaming. Just an unspoken truth that I had found what I needed again. And Michael no longer had to try to be someone he could. And perhaps, though he would never admit it, that was a relief. Our marriage wasn't broken, but it was changed. No more cold evenings, lying next to each other without a word. No more times when he longed for something but couldn't have it. We found a way to continue in a way no one expected. At first, I thought it was just an experiment, a way to fill the void in me without hurting our marriage, but it wasn't just a one-time thing or at-woo-time thing. It became a part of my life, our life. Michael never asked who I was with, nor did he ask me to share the details. He didn't need to know, and maybe he didn't want to know, but I could sense that something in him had changed. Maybe it was the change in meth that had affected him. I came out a different woman, more confident, more radiant. I no longer carried the frustration and disappointment with me. When I was with him, I no longer lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling and wondering what I had lost. I had found it again. And Michael knew it. One night, as I was putting on my long black dress, adjusting my lipstick in front of the mirror, I heard Michael's footsteps behind me. He stood in the bedroom doorway watching me. There was no judgment in his eyes, no jealousy, just quiet acceptance. "Where are we going today?" hessed his voice. Even I turned around, looking at him in the mirror, a new bar downtown. He nodded, not asking further. I picked up my bag and walked closer to him. For a moment, I saw his eyes flicker over me as if he were trying to understand me again, as if I were a mystery he had yet to fully understand. I paused, then gently placed a kiss on his cheek. I'll be back soon. He didn't respond right away, just nodded. Then I walked out the door, not looking back. Not it wasn't unusual anymore. Once a week, Michael would have a reason to be away once a week. I would have a date, someone new, someone who could give me what I needed. It wasn't always the same person. I wasn't looking for commitment. I wasn't looking for a new love. I didn't need someone to replace Michael. I just needed that feeling, to feel wanted, to be touched, to experience things that a long-term marriage could no longer provide. At first, I was afraid that this would push us apart. Instead, it brought us closer together in a strange way. Michael no longer had to try to be someone he wasn't. As for me, I no longer felt empty. People might say this was a betrayal, a sign that the marriage had failed, but I didn't see it that way. Our marriage wasn't falling apart, it just evolved. We found a way to hold on to each other, even when it meant giving each other up. There were no lies, no deception, just an agreement, a quiet understanding that love doesn't always follow a straight path. Michael never said this, but I knew he was relieved too. I saw it in the way he no longer felt pressured to make me happy in ways he couldn't. I saw it in the way he looked at me every morning, no longer a man trapped in helplessness, but one who had found a way to keep going. Some say sharing can make a marriage stronger. Others say this is the beginning of the end. What about you? Do you think an agreement like this can last? Or is this a line that should never be crossed? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you like this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. See you soon.